Good evening, everyone. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to get in. But I see there's a bunch of attendees coming in to the room, so welcome. Good evening. We're just going to give one more minute and then we'll get started. Welcome to everyone joining tonight.
Rochelle, you're muted.
That's got to happen at least once, right?
Yeah.
It's not a Zoom if you're not talking while muted.
Exactly.
So I'll start over. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Black Institute Group and its esteemed leader, Bertha Lewis, I want to thank you for joining us for tonight's workshop. My name is Rochelle Kelly-Absent, and I'm going to lead tonight's discussion. Hopefully, you've had the opportunity to attend our first workshop, Business Basics 101, Do You Have the Right Weed Business Sense?, where we discussed how to get prepared to enter the cannabis industry. And last week's workshop, The Cannabis Industry, It's Not Just a Nickel Bag, where we talked about the fact that there are so many business opportunities beyond retail and cultivation that you can take advantage of. If you did attend, you know by now that we try to keep these sessions informative. So please send us your questions. Just click on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen, type in your question, and we'll answer as many as time will allow. I'm going to share our contact information at the end of the workshop, so don't worry. Just in case we don't get to your question or you think of one later, you can still get in touch with us. Now, tonight, we're going to talk about the social equity goals of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, otherwise known as the MRTA, the latest on the recent licensing applications, and what the future of the cannabis industry in New York will look like for minority-owned businesses. And who best to have that discussion with than the Chief Equity Officer of the New York State Office of Cannabis Management, Damian Fagan. Damian, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. Hey, everybody, how's everyone doing tonight?
So look, before we get started, I heard a rumor that you are actually a farmer, and I want to just hear a little bit about that before you get into the whole, OCM discussion.
Yeah, no, it's an important thing because typically the types of people you see in this role come from Albany. They come from politics. They come from government. But prior to this, I was a farmer, and a small farmer, a hemp farmer in the Hudson Valley. I farmed in South Carolina, and I actually, my father's a farmer in Jamaica. My grandfather farmed that same property. So I'm what you would call a third generation farmer. I'm very passionate about Black farming, Black agriculture generally. We forget about, I'm born and raised in DC. So, a lot of Black DC comes from the South. They came from farming. A lot of Black New York has the same roots in agriculture in the deep South. And I find it just, it's a really rewarding industry in some ways. In some ways, it's very difficult. But a big part of what I bring to the role is that I was an operator. I was working in cannabis as a small operator, trying to get off the ground, and working in Black advocacy groups around agriculture and Black farming. And so I bring all of that passion and experience and life experience to the role.
That's awesome. And I think a lot of times people forget that that's our roots, right? Is tilling the ground and, having that access as this new industry, opens up, I think is really important for us to have a part in that. So how did you go from being a farmer to becoming, chief equity officer for OCM?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting story, pretty unique story actually, because so I was on I was an advocate in the space for years, for the last 7 years, 8 years in New York. I've been in hemp and in cannabis, and so in my previous role, I was working at Sustainable South Bronx, a nonprofit doing workforce development in the Hunts Point, and we were getting people ready for cannabis jobs. And as part of that role and part of some other advocacy work I was doing, I was on a radio show in Harlem. Curtis Archer and Bob Ponce, they got a radio show. And the episode I was on talking about cannabis in New York, social equity in New York, this is back in March. And I was saying, it was an hour and a half panel discussion about where we were as a state. And the majority leader, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, happened to be listening in. And after that conversation, I got a message from her chief of staff who invited me to come to Albany to talk to her about, what I think the state should be doing, where I thought social equity should be going in cannabis in New York. And I guess after that conversation, she thought I should be looking at a different job. And so that's how my name kind of got floated into the role. It wasn't necessarily like a resume submission or an interview process. It was, I was just kind of doing my thing, talking about what I thought, social equity could look like in New York, and the right people heard it.
That's great. And to speak on that, I think it's so important that we have someone paying attention to equity, because that's supposed to be a major component of the MRTA. Can you talk a little bit about some of the goals of OCM, some of the goals of the MRTA, or maybe just even if you want to just go into talking through how this process comes about from MRTA to where we are now?
Yeah.
And if you want to share your screen and you feel you're welcome to go into some of.
I got a quick little presentation here for folks, but I definitely want to. Can you guys see my screen? Is it coming out?
I see it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the chief equity officer role, it's one of 3 positions that the MRTA creates. The first is the chairwoman, Tremaine Wright. The second is Chris Alexander, the executive director, and the third is the chief equity officer. And the chief equity officer role, the way it was intended was really to be, 2 things. One, a watchdog, and really keeping the executive director and the Cannabis Control Board to the principles of the MRTA, to equitable distribution of opportunity for cannabis legalization. And the second is, a manager of all those programs. So, the responsibilities of social equity and economic development here at OCM, I manage with my team. And so that could look like, ensuring that the regulations lead to equitable outcomes, that we're not blocking people from opportunity, that we're not creating barriers to access, that we're prioritizing those most harmed by the war on drugs, which I can talk a little bit about later. And we're prioritizing them in ways of licensing, loans, grants, technical support. But really, one of the benefits of me being in this role is that the role of chief equity officer was put in there in case there were people in charge of the Office of Cannabis Management and the Cannabis Control Board who were not pursuing equity. And so the position could be there as like a backstop to prevent that from happening. Fortunately for New York, Chris Alexander and Tremaine Wright are equity first. leaders in the space. And so, my job is a lot easier than it probably would have been under previous administration. And Chris and Tremaine are two fierce advocates for inclusion and opportunity, especially with the Black community in New York. And so really what my job is to work hand in glove with them and ensure that we're aligned and that we're pursuing the same goals and that things are moving along in an equitable way. And so I'm going to quickly go through just a little background on the MRTA and where we are right now with the card dispensaries. And then I really want to save enough time to do Q&A because I feel like usually in these cases, you can find a lot of this information on our website, ocm.ny.gov. But in the Q&A, a lot of the other stuff, more details can come out. So I'll just quickly run through this. So what is the MRTA? The Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act signed into law in 2021, legalized adult use cannabis, and is, opening up the legal market, the illegal adult use market with a public health framework. So this is about, recreational sales of marijuana, of tested, safe, high quality product, dispensaries, all over the state, selling that product that's regulated and lab tested. So what's legal right now in New York? You can consume cannabis anywhere you can smoke a cigarette or vape outdoors. Soon you'll be able to consume cannabis on on-site consumption lounges. And you can also consume in the privacy of your own home. We will be having, eventually we will have home grow for all New Yorkers over the age of 21. 18 months after the first dispensary opens, it will be legal for any New Yorker who wants to grow cannabis at home to register with the state and start growing 6 plants a year in the privacy of their own home. And that's an important aspect because everyone says, this is all about money and making money and blah, blah, blah. No, it's about access. If people want to be able to grow their own plants and not spend a lot of money buying it from these stores, they should be allowed to. And so that was a huge cornerstone of the MRTA to allow New Yorkers to grow their own cannabis plants. That is not a right in most legal markets because cannabis companies don't like that. They want to be able to be the only ones to sell cannabis. And so Chris and the majority leader and Liz Kruger, they fought hard for home grow. And so right now we medical home grow for medical patients, for if you're registered with the medical cannabis program, you can also do home grow as of October 5th. We just finalized that last week at our Cannabis Control Board meeting. So here are the things that we oversee. So we oversee adult use recreational cannabis, which is what we're going to talk about today. The medical cannabis program, which is 10 medical cannabis providers that have dispensaries throughout the state providing medical cannabis to patients. We also oversee hemp, which is what I grew as a farmer. And that's primarily what you guys would refer to as CBD, industrial hemp. Here are the 9 license types, and don't worry about saving this. I mean, we can share this. This is a presentation we give throughout the state, and so we can share this after the discussion, so you guys can all have it. But these are the 9 license types that we're going to be rolling out next year. In the first half of next year, we got cultivation licenses, nurseries, processors, distributors, a retail dispensary, delivery license, on-site consumption. We have a cooperative license, which is something that I'm particularly excited about. And my team right now is literally next door in the other office finishing the regulations for cooperative licenses. That will essentially allow, let's say, a group of 20 folks to come together, all put $1,000 in and start a grow, as opposed to needing to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars individually. They can come together, form a democratically controlled entity, LLC, cooperative, and grow, process, and distribute cannabis products. We also have a micro business license, which is the only vertically integrated license that is going to be available. And we can talk about that in the Q&A, but essentially a micro business, which is intended primarily for social and economic equity applicants. This allows you to go from seed to sale all the way to the customer. So you can capture all those profit margins at every step of the chain. All the other licenses are separate. So you can only, if you have a cultivator license, you cannot have a retail license. If you have a distributor license, you cannot have an on-site consumption license. We've separated retail from production. So any license that touches the consumer, sells directly to consumer, you cannot have any interest in a company that produces cannabis. Social equity, my mandate right here, making sure that New York State does the right thing and lives up to the high ideals of the MRTA. Three key elements of the social equity plan and the social equity rollout in New York State. Record expungement that happened immediately upon signing of the MRTA. Everyone's marijuana arrest record convictions was expunged. That was key to automatically clearing all these cannabis convictions to moving forward as a state to forgiving those past convictions. The second is equity in the market. And this is something that we can talk a lot about today, but this is supporting people from those communities most harmed by the war on drugs, people that have been left out of legal industries in other states, supporting them, accessing the market and building businesses. And third, and quite honestly, probably one of the most impactful elements of social equity in this law is community reinvestment. This puts the tax dollars generated from sales of legal cannabis back into those communities that were most harmed, disproportionately impacted by prohibition. And this slide kind of goes into how that money reaches those communities. So 40% of all the tax revenue generated, annual tax revenue generated in New York will go to community grant reinvestments. And we estimate that this could be anywhere between $400 to $700 million a year going into communities, zip codes, precinct locations that experienced a lot of harm from prohibition, a lot of arrests, and a lot of harassment from police. And so these this fund, annual fund, will be provided to these communities in the form of grants to nonprofits, to businesses, to a bunch of different community organizations, parks, churches, what have you. Groups will be able to apply for grants from this fund to improve their community. And again, this is every year. So this is $400 to $700 million every year being made available just to these communities. And that's forever. That's in the law. That's decades. We're going to see that investment go into these communities. And that's something that we're all really excited about. The other 60%, 20% goes into drug treatment and public education, and the other 40% will go to schools. So the more weed you buy, the more we fund our schools, the more we fund these communities disproportionately impacted. That gives us every incentive to make this as huge an industry as possible, and attracting all those tourists and people from out of state to come shop and buy cannabis from us. That just goes right back into our pockets and into our communities. I think you alluded to this earlier, but here are a list of the myriad of other opportunities outside of just a licensed cannabis business. So let's say the cannabis market in New York, $10 billion a year when it's at its most mature, when it matures into a full-on marketplace in a few years here, $10 billion a year. On top of that, you can expect at least 30% more, like 3 billion to 4 billion, to be in this space, into the ancillary businesses. These are the non-plant touching businesses, the ones that support the legal cannabis businesses. And so these are things that our community, Black community in New York, have been doing, have businesses doing, and can take advantage of these opportunities. Packaging and labeling, security work, electrician work, design firms, accounting, software, compliance, a ton of things. This doesn't just have to be construction. This can be legal work. This can be branding, marketing, event planning. But this is going to be a key market that we want to, incentivize folks to really contract from MWBEs and from businesses located in these communities that were disproportionately impacted. I'm going to quickly skip through this to talk about the conditional licenses that we're doing this year. So this year, you've heard a lot of news and announcements about licensing going out to a bunch of different groups in New York. This is a conditional licensing year. The Office of Cannabis Management at the beginning of this year probably had 20 full-time staff, did not have the capacity really to roll out what will eventually be thousands of licenses and a full-fledged supply chain, full-fledged industry. And so, but they still wanted to start off the industry, get it going, get some people in, and start figuring out how this is going to work. And so that's the conditional licensing. We've licensed upwards of 240 family farms, distressed farms, hemp farms upstate to start growing cannabis earlier this year. and they will be sending their products to 15 licensed conditional processors who are going to be turning that biomass into finished products, which will then go into the Chris just walked by. That will then go into the conditional retail dispensaries, which we're calling CARD. And so a lot of you have probably heard of CARD. Yesterday was actually the last day to apply to be in CARD. These are the conditional adult use retail dispensaries, 150 dispensaries across 175 dispensaries across the state that will be selling the first legal product in the state of New York. And these dispensaries are incredibly unique in that they have to be majority owned by someone who had a marijuana related arrest conviction or their family member. And so these dispensaries will be what you would call turnkey retail dispensaries. So the state is actually going to put up the money to build them out, renovate them, put all the equipment you need to run the place inside, the point of sale software, everything, so that these folks who applied for licenses, when they're selected, they can just plug in their business, plug in their brand, and start their business in what will likely be some of the the most profitable foot traffic heavy locations in the state. And one thing I'll say about why do we do it this way, in state after state, if you talk to any Black or brown cannabis operators in other states, the number one impediment to accessing the market is, one, is capital, getting the money. Two is real estate. So in New York City, for example, real estate is the most expensive in the world. And when they were looking at this opportunity, how do we make someone who got arrested for weed in the South Bronx, how do we ensure that they can open a dispensary in Soho, Tribeca, Midtown, when these landlords honestly will often not rent to them or provide them that that space to start their businesses, especially when the rent is exceedingly high. You need a lot of startup capital, millions of dollars to start. That's where the state decided, like, let's lock up these facilities, let's lock up these spaces, and help them access those real estate, those turnkey locations. And so that's what CARD is. CARD is intended to solve for some of those barriers to entry with real estate and capital, and so that we can start our legal industry with folks who were justice involved, who spent time potentially in prison for marijuana, or their family member. The second qualification that these folks will have is that they have operated a business successfully and can show 2 years of profitability at any point in their lifetime. And so a good example of who we're talking about here, let's say somebody in Harlem was arrested, 1992, 18 years old, whole life was, disrupted by this arrest. They probably couldn't get a college scholarship, had to put it on their job applications, a lot of setbacks. But despite all those setbacks, that person was still able to go and open a corner store, a barbershop, contracting firm, maybe some other type of business. Those individuals are the ones that are qualifying or stepping into these turnkey real estate locations. And happy to report that when licensing closed, I think that the last applicant that I saw on Twitter post that he was number 880. So we had 800 and probably 800, 900 total applications across the state for 175 locations. And so what we're going to do over the next 2 to 4 weeks is score those applications and assign them to their location. As you can imagine, most people selected New York City, Manhattan as their number one location to open up a dispensary. And so we have to sort. All right, if you didn't place high enough to get Manhattan, what's your next choice? Is it Westchester? Is it Brooklyn? Is it Queens? And so we'll start sorting people to different locations across the state so that they can open their shops. And I'll stop there, and because I think I can answer more in the Q&A about CARD and about some of the other opportunities that folks are going to have to get into this space. Yeah, I'll turn it back over to you.
No, thank you so much for that. And so a lot to unpack. I'm going to go back to the CARD application a little bit. The application period is just closed, as you said. And so how are applicants going to get notified of their status? Like what's the next step for an applicant?
So the next step for an applicant will be, they'll be notified that they were selected. And so in order to apply for CARD, for these dispensary licenses, all you had to do was go on New York Business Express, the business portal that the state uses, and show your arrest or the arrest of one of your family members, the paperwork, and those 2 years of profitability for your business, your qualifying business. And so you didn't have to write a business plan. You didn't have to do all this other stuff that, you know, is asking a lot up front. So those two pieces of information, you know, your arrest and your business that you manage, are all the information that we're going to use to score the applications. Once we score those applications and we've announced, you know, those people selected, you know, we'll call them, we'll send emails. All right, you've been selected. Here's the location we'd like to assign you. And then they'll go about doing their business plan, getting their vendor agreements in place, and starting to, you know, raise any capital they might need to get going and move into that facility. So in probably a month, applicants will start to hear from us about whether or not they were successful.
Thank you for that. And what if an applicant submitted all the information, they might have missed something, or you had some questions about anything? Is there going to be an opportunity to have that back and forth, or is it just you had to submit your application in perfect form and you have so many applicants you just can't get through it?
No, we're doing that differently. A lot of other states have basically said, like, oh, you forgot to submit this, you're disqualified. Nah, we're not doing that. That's not right. So a perfect example is a young woman from Brooklyn who came to the Cannabis Control Board meeting recently. She was talking about how she was applying because her son was arrested, and her son, she had an issue uploading the birth certificate on the website. And so she was worried that, you know, it didn't go through and you weren't going to see. If we see that you are qualifying based on, you know, your son being arrested and you forgot to upload a document, we're going to reach back out in the next few weeks. Hey, just so you know, we need this document. If you could send that over, we can finish reviewing your application. So that won't disqualify people.
Okay, that's great. I'm sure that's going to be a relief to some folks who might have left one thing off of the application, but everything else is pretty much intact. And as you mentioned, scoring, businesses that are currently listed as MWBE, like, are they going to get any additional points, or, you know, is there anything there that would give them some additional, you know, viewing?
No, not that. And so, and this is, we can get into this later, but this is going to be, you know, a topic that's really important for folks to understand, especially in the Black community, to talk about. There are a lot of restrictions on how we can categorize or score people based on race, ethnicity, and gender in the state of New York. You know, MWBEs, that program requires disparity studies that show that, you know, you can't, that despite best efforts, that these contractors, MWBEs, are still not getting the contracts at the same rate as you know, white-owned businesses. And so that's what justifies the MWBE program. We haven't been able to do a disparity study on the cannabis industry because the cannabis industry doesn't exist yet. But there are other ways for us to ensure that there is equitable and representative ownership in these dispensaries. And I'll give you an example of one. One of the things that we score is what zip code you lived in at the time of your arrest. If you lived in an area that was over incarcerated and over policed, you score higher. And you know, what we did by, you know, requiring this, that you had this marijuana related conviction, that you and scoring the zip codes, you know, who was arrested in the state of New York for the last 30 years, 40 years for marijuana? It was Black and brown people primarily, disproportionately represented in the pool of people they locked up for cannabis. And so we expect similar representation when we prioritize these licenses for people who have these arrests. We expect that representation to show through there.
That's great. Will there be another round of card licenses, or is this the end of this particular license?
This is the end of this particular license. And for folks who are worried about that, do not despair. There are thousands of other licenses and dispensary licenses. So let's talk numbers. So this is 175 dispensaries. individuals will be able to open up 2 additional locations on top of this in the future. So they'll be able to expand to 3. So basically, we licensed 450 potential dispensaries in the state. If we reach our max, demand for cannabis across the state, we need 2,000, 3,000 dispensaries. And so we're just talking about 500 max, 400 max here. So we've got a lot of licenses to give out over the next few years. And we'll probably do that in a staggered, manner, licensing a certain amount every year, so that we don't overwhelm the system in the state. But there will be a lot of other opportunities to open up dispensaries. I will say, CARD has shown us that that state government can do more than just give somebody a license. And so, there have been conversations with the city of New York, because they are also getting involved in this. How can we make some of the properties that the state and city own, industrial warehouses, agricultural land, available to these communities to cultivate cannabis, to process cannabis, to manufacture products? And so the CARD program is over. There will be thousands of other dispensary licenses available, but it's also a model for how we can improve access to the other license types as well.
You mentioned, I guess, support for these, for these new businesses. You talked about the fact that a lot of times capital might be a hindrance, real estate is a hindrance. You also mentioned that part of this CARD licensing, you will receive a location. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and what the responsibilities of the license holder will be in regards to that space, and whether it's going to be furnished? What are they getting with that space, and what is their responsibility once they have it?
Yep. Fully furnished, all the software in place, cash registers, ATMs, fully decked out. All you really would have to do is give them, first of all, it's DASNY, the Dormitory Authority, and their contractors who are managing this. We're partnering with them on it. But they will be building out a fully turnkey facility that you can kind of decide how you want to plug your brand into, and your logos and everything like that. And so the responsibilities of the business that moves into that location, first and foremost, the cost of that location is a loan. So each dispensary will cost anywhere between $500,000 and $1.5 million, depending on where it is. Like, for example, a dispensary in Buffalo is not going to cost the same as a dispensary in Midtown. And so the business that moves into that space will be responsible to pay off that loan at a certain interest rate. I think it's like 8 to 12%. Could go higher though. But it's an unsecured loan, which is important to understand, because the individual, if the business doesn't succeed, they're not personally responsible for paying back that loan. We will instead we'll give them a chance to make good on that loan, and obviously try and work with them as much as possible to be successful. I mean, we want every one of these license recipients to succeed here. And so we're going to provide them a lot of back office support, technical training. We're bringing in cannabis retail dispensary experts from out in California to actually train them in how dispensaries are run out there. We're partnering with some other agencies in state government to ensure that they have back office business development support, accounting, legal, all these other things. And so they'll be responsible for the loan and operationalizing the space, selling cannabis. We're going to connect them with the processors and farmers that have been licensed upstate to start buying products. One thing that is for certain is that there's a lot of product that was just grown in the state of New York and is being processed right now that is ready to go on those shelves. And so the dispensaries will actually have their pick of the litter as far as like sourcing product and getting good prices. And so we're really confident that they're going to be successful because of all this effort that went into making sure that.
Well, that's good to know that they're going to be supported. And there's the fund that was, talked about. Is that fund just going to be utilized for the buildings? Is there a way for some of these businesses to receive some of the funds? what does that look like as far as capital support, so to speak?
Yeah, so the funding will exclusively be used for the space, for the build out, for the renovation, for the equipment, for the software. The recipients of these licenses will be raising their own capital to cover some salaries, initial salaries, and some inventory stuff. We will also be connecting them with investors. I know a lot of them, have been talking very publicly about they're finding investors because they're opening the first dispensaries in one of the biggest cannabis markets on the East Coast, in the country, really. And so we're fairly confident that they will won't have too many challenges with the turnkey retail operation and the first license in the state to sell product at raising that additional cash they need to pay their salary and to buy some inventory and to get going.
Okay.
We're hoping as well that we can find some banking partners to give them loans, because when I was a cannabis operator, the one way I was able to get in the space was equity, was giving up half my company to investors, because when you don't have a lot of capital, that's really all you can work with, is just ownership of your company. And so the requirement in the law is that these individuals that win these licenses, they have to maintain 51% ownership of their company. But that 49%, they will probably bring on a lot of partners to help them pay for everything.
All right. One of the things that everyone's asking about is the future licenses. And I heard you mention the cooperative licenses are being worked on as we speak. Can we expect those to be the next licenses to be released?
Oh, yeah. Yep. And so, you can expect to look out for is really the regulations that we're about to release. So the regulations that we're going to be releasing in the next month or two are going to be the ones that explain what you'll need to have to get this license, what you'll need to have to get that license, when you can expect to apply for that license, what that application might look like. Do you need to have real estate? Do you not need to have real estate? So it'll have all the rules of the road for folks to understand how to get those other licenses. And I also want to explain one thing. So, when we talk about these card licenses, there's only 175, right? Because we're not capping the number of, sorry, they're cleaning up the office. And we're not capping the number of card licenses that these dispensaries we can open up. We just have a certain amount of funding, $200 million, and we can't really go above that. And that's how much money we can spend to do this. With the other license types, we're not capping them. If you're going to want to start a brand, or you're going to want to get a distribution license or a delivery license, those won't be limited in number. If they definitely will be a certain amount released in certain spurts, like certain periods of time. But we have the commitment to making sure that these licenses are accessible. If people want to get a license, they should be able to get a license. The only thing that will be somewhat limited, not capped as like a number or anything, but just by space, is the retail licenses, because there's only so many places you can put a dispensary. And it's not yet like alcohol, where they have a liquor store in every corner. Dispensaries are going to build up slowly till we reach max capacity. But yeah, so the regulations we release in the next month, 6 to 8 weeks, they will inform all of the other license types that we will make available in the first half of next year. Probably by the end of spring next year, everyone else will be able to apply for licenses.
Okay. And then as far as the cooperative licenses, will that be a conditional license, or is that?
No, yeah. So all the licenses that we've authorized so far are conditional licenses. They are limited by, the growers have 2 years, the processor have 2 years. They can then apply to convert to a full license, but they're conditional. And another way of looking at the word conditional, by the way, is, in order to be a conditional cultivator, you had to meet the conditions of being a hemp farmer. In order to be a conditional dispensary operator, you had to meet the conditions of being justice impacted. And so there won't be any conditions you have to meet to apply for the full licenses. You will just have to apply, and we will, have some sort of evaluation criteria and some prioritization for folks from communities disproportionately impacted, and from certain equity groups to prioritize them for licensing. But there won't be anything to conditionally qualifying you for these licenses. You'll just apply, you'll pay a fee and you'll apply.
Okay, so the card license will be the last quote unquote
That's the last conditional license, yeah.
Okay. And we have a couple of questions that are a little bit more technical. I'm trying to see if there's something that would be more universal. Let's see.
Oh man, these are good. These people have been paying attention. I can just
they're listening. They're listening. You wanna this one I don't even understand completely. What a compliance complaint that has a flat fee consulting arrangement with a cultivator qualify as a TPI if paid over 100,000 in a year.
Yes.
Is that too?
Yes, they would qualify as a TPI. And for folks who don't know what TPI is, true party of interest. And I just want to quickly explain what true party of interest is, why it's important. So a lot of other cannabis markets, legal markets, they allow for you to grow, package, distribute, and sell directly to a consumer. And so that's a vertically integrated license. If you have a state that only has vertically integrated licenses, the minimum amount of money you'll need to get into that space is like $10 million, because you have to build the grow, you have to build the processor, you have to build the distributor, you have to build the store. And so the only people who can access those markets, because we can't take money out of banks and we don't have access to a lot of other types of capital that the state or federal government can supply, are very wealthy people. So what we did in New York is we do a two-tiered system like alcohol. If you are a grower, you can only grow. If you're a producer, you can only produce. And if you're a seller, you can only sell. So now if you get a license to grow, you only need money to build the grow. If you get a license to do a retail, you only need the money to do a retail operation. It creates more access to small business and medium-sized business. And so the TPI means that if someone has, if you paid someone more than $100,000 a year, or they have, 20% or more equity in your company, or they're a true party of interest, they're an owner, they're a part of your company. So now they cannot go to someone who's not on, in retail. They can't go to a cultivation and provide that same service. They can't go to a producer and provide that same service. They're a TPI of a retail operation, so they can't cross those tiers. And the reason we're doing this is very simple, because when you cross those tiers, that's how people with a lot of money can start to influence that relationship. They can start saying like, oh, you should only buy from this brand, from that grower. You should only stock your shelves with this product. We'll pay you this much money to stock our shelves with this product. And so then it just becomes a competition of who has the most money, not who is selling the best cannabis or running the best business or is the most popular brand. It's literally just who has the most money. And that's what we're trying to avoid in New York.
Okay, there's a question here about the distribution license and what the timing on that would be.
So the same as the rest of the licenses, end of spring, first half of next year, it'll be available. If you want to be a distributor, those are the folks who, I imagine a lot of distribution companies will start up on the outskirts of the city. They'll be stocked full of product. Dispensaries will order directly from the distributor to bring down to their shelves. And yeah, it's a great business to get into, but those will be available in the next round for first half of next year.
So is the anticipation that you'll have all of the other 9 licenses or 8 licenses available within that same truncated time, or
yeah, the only license
roll them out one by one?
No, they'll all become available at the same time next year. The only license that may not be available at the same time as all the others is on-site consumption, just because it's a trickier one to figure out how to make it work. And for those of you who don't know, on-site consumption, think of any kind of cannabis lounge in, I don't know, Amsterdam. I've never been there, but I know they have like those coffee shops where you can consume cannabis there. It's like a bar for cannabis. But we're still trying to figure out how that's going to work and how to make it profitable and how to make it a good business for people to run.
Got it. There's a question here. What is a registered organization as is referenced in the AUCC guidance?
The medical cannabis companies. Their legal term in the law is registered organization. They have been part of the medical cannabis program since it was legal in 2015, 2016. They are also, there's 10 of them, and most of them are some of the biggest cannabis companies in the country. And that's what registered organization means.
Great. Compliance software, do you have a company already chosen, and is the company chosen the required company across the board, or can you identify another company?
This person is paying very close attention.
Yeah. Maybe they want to apply for the RFP.
So I think that if they're talking about the tracking software, that the company that the state has chosen to do that has not been announced yet. So no, we don't have that yet. If you're using any other software, I mean, you'll be able to use whatever compliance software you want. But the tracking metric BioTrack, we have not announced that yet, but that'll be coming in the next week or two.
Got it. Okay. What are the education opportunities and partnerships like in New York State? So do they exist already? I guess it's more asking, how are you thinking about working with them? How will the funding? I think if you can talk a little bit more into that.
Yeah. So I actually came from education. I was cannabis adjunct at Medgar Evers College this last spring before I came on board at OCM. And so, we're very focused on supporting our CUNY and SUNY schools to step into this space and start offering adult use education, community college education, whatever, integrating cannabis education into their curriculums to get our young people and to get our community ready for this opportunity. And so I can sort of announce, next week we will be announcing a training program, a compliance training program with our partners at SUNY Morrisville and Cornell. We're going to be offering a compliance training program for experienced cannabis operators in the unregulated market and other underrepresented farmers across the state to start learning about compliance and cannabis compliance and how it works, so that people are ready to transition to the legal market next year.
That's awesome. It seems like we have a couple of folks who are in the consulting world. So if we are already NYC MBE certified for another business, can potential clients not contract with us because we hold a cannabis license?
Let me read. If we are already NYC and minority business, okay, certified for
right, they're certified for another business.
So a cannabis company, I don't really understand the question. So if we hold a cannabis license, Melody, maybe ask that question, phrase that question again. Maybe they are against cannabis, I agree with them. Oh, so like if you are an ancillary, I think I get it. So if you are providing services to a cannabis business, will you lose other clients because they don't like cannabis? I think is the question Melody's asking. Yeah, we can't control that. I would, it's possible, I guess. I can't see why.
Maybe they're asking about discrimination. That it seems like more like a discrimination question.
I don't think we'll be able to protect against how people feel about cannabis, but it's legal. They can feel out however they want. It's coming, and there's not much they can do about it. A majority of New Yorkers support legal cannabis. That's why it was passed into law. And so if companies don't want to work with other companies that work in cannabis, they're going to have trouble finding companies to work with, because this is a $10 billion industry that's coming to New York, and it's going to work with a lot of companies.
Right. Hopefully that answered your question, Melody. How do you envision marketing and advertising in the space? And are the packaging restrictions announced the way things are going?
Yeah, so the packaging and marketing restrictions or regulations that we released were a little controversial because people, because the legacy community, how they sell cannabis, they're very like colorful packaging. And a lot of the cannabis companies, a lot of these products also are marketed like candy, Skittles and cookies, and And that's something that we kind of have to move away from as a state, because the whole point of legalization is to regulate and restrict access for folks under 21 years old. I started smoking weed when I was 13, and I regret it. It was not the right time to consuming cannabis. It's not good for developing brains. And so, packaging and labeling, these restrictions are in place to keep these products, another thing I'll say is, we forget in the Black community, how they marketed cigarettes and liquor towards folks in our community. They used a lot of celebrities, a lot of brands, a lot of colorful packaging to sell to kids, to sell liquor and sell malt liquor. And we learned a lot from that. There's exploitative ways companies can try and market these products to our communities. And so the restrictions in place are really meant to ensure that people aren't tricked into consuming something they shouldn't be. But I think we've updated our guidance around packaging and labeling to reflect a lot of the feedback we got from the community. So it's less strict now. We're allowing for more co-branding, more drawings, colors. There's less. It's gonna look good. They'll look good. But advertising is separate. You can't advertise cannabis, because advertising is federally regulated. Commercials, a lot of radio. And so anything that involves federal regulations, cannabis companies can't access. So maybe, in the future there may be billboards, but that'll be about it. The rest of the marketing that folks will have to do is, social media and word of mouth and events.
We have a question about how to get answers about compliance for growers. So I'm guessing it's going to your website, but is there any place specific that they can go to get questions answered about compliance?
Yeah, if you go to our website and go to the conditional cultivators section or the adult use section, there's a lot of questions there. There's a lot of guidance in how to be compliant as a cultivator. But the actual regulations on cultivation compliance will come out in the next 6 to 8 weeks with the other regulations, with the broader industry regulations that will explain how to be compliant as a cultivator.
Got it. And the compliance training that you mentioned, is there a way for folks to audit it and possibly participate in it?
We'll be able to say more about it next week, but it's primarily intended for, and I don't want to give people's hopes up about it. It's for people who have experience, Black farmers who have been farming in vegetables or other crops who want to transition into cannabis, and for people who have a lot of experience in illicit cannabis, unregulated cannabis production, and who are farmers, underrepresented farmers. And so it's primarily intended for those folks. It's just going to be a compliance training program that is more applicable to people who are already growing crops or selling products, and it's intended to really just get that community trained and up to speed, so that next year they can apply.
Will hydroponic stores be allowed to sell its own products?
Yeah, why not? We don't regulate hydroponic stores. They're allowed to sell to whoever they want. They don't have a license. So we only regulate licensed businesses. If you have a license to grow, sell, process cannabis, that goes through us. Any of the companies that service those companies, that's not us. You don't need to be regulated to do that.
So for any of the ancillary that's not plant touching.
Yeah. If you want to start helping these cannabis card dispensaries with branding or with security or accounting, ask them, sell your services to them. They get to decide. But there's no one going to stop you from doing that. I think what we will try to do later on, next year, is try to connect some of our MWB ancillary businesses, people who do construction, people who do all these other businesses, try to connect them with the cannabis licensed businesses so that they contract with MWBs. We will be trying to do that.
That would be great to provide. That would be just an additional resource of support for folks that are trying to get off the ground. I think that would be great. Yeah. You kind of alluded to a time frame of spring. Regular licenses, so I guess the non-conditional, you already said non-conditional is going to end. This is the last one, and then every other license after that will be just a standard license.
Yep.
The one question, we had as well was, are you going to allow space between the setup of the conditional dispensaries and the standard licensing dispensaries, so that they have an opportunity to kind of build, their profit before you allow the floodgates to open, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these card dispensaries will be up and running January, February, March of next year. And if we start reviewing applications, accepting applications in June, it's going to take us a few months to go through those applications. Then we give out the licenses. Then a lot of folks will have to actually go out and take those licenses and open those stores. So that's going to take another 3 to 6 months for them to get the capital and get those businesses up and running. So they will have maybe a year, 10 months, 8 months of runway to establish themselves in the communities.
Okay, but they won't have the conditional are the only ones that are required for locations chosen by the state. They will be able to identify their own locations.
Yeah, and I'll say something about that, which is something that my team is very on top of. And so I'll give you an example. So there's a Black woman I know in Los Angeles who was awarded a retail dispensary license as a social equity license 2.5 years ago, and she still has not opened the doors of her store because she cannot find real estate. No one will rent her a compliant space at a rate that she can afford. And so this happens in state after state because, with social equity applicants, we tend not to require that they have rented or own a property to get a license, because that's just a barrier to entry. What typically states will do is they'll give a social equity applicant the license and then give them 12 months to go find the location to open up that store, to open up that grow. And so they can use the license to go to investors and be like, listen, I got a license. Like, can I get some money to get this place? And so we find that that's easier for social equity applicants to get into the industry. If you require them to have the space, you're requiring them to have like $1 million, $500,000 up front. It's very difficult. But then comes the situation where, like, we can't force landlords to rent to them. You know what I mean? We know that there's racism with landlords who selective of who they rent to. And in the case of someone with the cannabis business, a landlord might say, like, yeah, I charge $10,000 for a regular bodega, but I'm going to charge $40,000 a month for your cannabis business because I can. And so that's one of the things we're tracking to ensure it doesn't happen here, that people can find properties at affordable rates to open their businesses. But you will be able to find your own location with the next dispensary license, and it won't be provided by the state.
I know you mentioned on-site consumption license already, and the regulations are still being drafted at this point, but do you have any idea about what the requirements will look like? The eligibility requirements and regulations? Not yet.
I can't say anything until we release the regs and everyone sees it at the same time.
Got it. So stay tuned, Tamir.
Stay tuned. Yeah. Sign up on the website for updates.
There's a mention here about education for the younger folks, right? From middle school, high school, just as far as, being aware. So, is there going to be some effort by OCM to do some, PSAs or, some type of on the ground, information for parents and for kids?
Yeah, there will be. And, we have a public health team at OCM that's very focused on how this is going to affect kids. And so we've looked at a lot of other legal states and what happened after legalization with the use of cannabis among under 21, among under 18-year-olds. And it's all gone down. Legalization leads to less kids accessing weed because there's less weed being sold on the street, Union Square Park. It gets to a place where they can only ever buy weed from a store that cards them. It's the same thing with what happened with alcohol. Like, kids can use fake IDs and but it's hard. They're not selling alcohol in the street where kids can go after school and buy alcohol. And so we expect that to see a reduction in cannabis use among youth. Especially, I think one thing that really bothers me is that the product that is being sold in, Union Square Park and on the street, no one's tested it. No, it's not safe. Like, we don't know where it's from. And so a big push part of legalization is to make sure that the only product sold in New York is tested by people we regulate, that we trust, and so that we know what people are smoking. The kids, young people that are buying weed today, it's coming here off the back of trucks from California, from Oklahoma. It's probably got pesticide and other things wrong with it. And I mean, so it's a big fear, a big worry of ours is getting that stuff out of the hands of kids and getting off the street, basically. But to the question, like, definitely education and a campaign around marijuana use among kids, and teaching them about what's happening statewide is going to be critical to successfully rolling this out. I know of a couple groups that actually go in Brooklyn that go to talk to parent-teacher groups at some of these big schools in Brooklyn to talk to parents about what's happening with cannabis, what is cannabis, and what's legalization look like. And she did an amazing study at this one school in Bed-Stuy, where she polled middle school and junior high school students about how many words do you know for weed. These kids knew like 100 words for weed. Like, they knew. This has been part of youth culture in New York for decades. Like, kids are very aware of what cannabis is, strains, types of cannabis, where to get it. And yeah, we need to do better as a city and as a state at keeping cannabis out of the hands of kids.
In that same vein, what about illegal smoke shops? What's OCM doing
Yeah.
in order to crack down on that? I saw this whole article in Empire Reports this morning. Brazen, to say the least.
Yeah. So, this is a combination of a couple things. One, New York City is an really expensive city. New Yorkers, particularly middle income, working class New Yorkers, have always kind of used the illicit cannabis market as a way to supplement their income when they're late on rent or when they lose a job. And so when you look at what's happening with illegal cannabis sales in Union Square Park at some of these smoke shops, rent right now is like $3,500 for a one bedroom in the city. And so there's a lot of people who are, besides the people who are still out of work from the pandemic, there's a lot of people who are just like, there's a cash grab happening right now. They sense an opportunity. There's this gray market while the state's working things out to make some quick cash. But no, they will not be there for very much longer. I think what's happening with the stores is obviously, we've taken about 50 trucks off the street, some of the trucks that were selling cannabis. The stores will be next. We're really just working with our local and state partners to figure out how we're going to go about doing that. There's a multiple ways we could do that. All these smoke shops are in violation of public health laws. They're in violation of tax law. So there will be repercussions, and they will obviously probably not qualify to apply for a legal license because they did this. And so I think the one way to look at it is that once we have legal stores up in Manhattan, in New York City, Brooklyn, those stores will get shut down, because you cannot have legal, taxed, compliant stores that are owned and operated by people who went to prison for cannabis next to someone who's not paying taxes, who's not abiding by the compliance requirements, who didn't wait their turn to apply for a license. So those stores, we're not trying to go back to the old days of cannabis enforcement. You know what I mean? We're never going back to the days of people going to prison for this. And so we obviously don't want to rush to start punishing people immediately. But eventually, those stores will have to go, and in order to make way for the legal stores.
You mentioned the grants available for social equity. There are, lots of nonprofits doing work around, cannabis education, such as this one. We are having there's this one organization that says they're helping the community. How can they get a grant? Can they get a grant for growing? Excuse me.
So yes, there will be grants and low interest loans available for growers, for social equity applicants and businesses, just not yet. So that will come pretty much right after we start licensing, giving out all the other licenses. We're building up that program now. And I think one thing that I didn't touch on that I kind of want to mention is there's one community that's going to have a lot of prioritization in licensing and grants and loans. And it's not necessarily MWBEs. It's individuals from communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And so they're called CDIs. It's in the MRTA. It's defined as communities disproportionately impacted. And so my team right now, one of the things that we're working on, about 3 weeks ago, a month ago, we received every marijuana arrest in New York State dating back to 1980. And that data includes, name, home address, gender, race, age, ethnicity, everything. And so we are essentially going to go about, by the way, it's 1.2 million individual arrests. So it's enough data to crash your computer as soon as you open it. And so it's horrifying, data too. Like if you look at some of the counties that were doing these arrests, like the county's 20% Black and 80% of the arrests were Black. And so we're going to look at where those communities were, where in Long Island, where in Queens, where in the Bronx, where in Manhattan, where in Rochester, and we're going to define them block by block. And so essentially, if you lived in any of those communities from, we haven't decided on the time period, but it'll be like 1990 to 2010, 8 years within that 20-year span, you will qualify as someone from the community disproportionately impacted. And so you will immediately get prioritization and access to licensing, access to grants, incubators, and other assistance in entering the market. And so we plan to, wrap up that work over the next 3 months and release that publicly. We're actually, want to show the data, show where the arrests were, show the state what happened, sort of like a truth and reconciliation moment to really, point a finger at it, like, look what we did to our communities. Look what we did to these communities, because it was incredibly damaging. And so, yeah, I'll stop there. But the grants will be available to people who apply with marijuana arrest records, individuals from communities disproportionately impacted, MWBEs and others, and it's intended to support them entering the market.
Okay. What about rooftop growing? Or is that going to be allowed?
Probably not. But it's not because we don't think it's a good idea. It's just zoning. If you want to, so for home grow, yeah, possibly you could grow your home grow cannabis on top of your roof. But if it's zoned residential or zoned commercial, you can't have a farm on that zone. So you have to grow your cannabis in areas that are zoned industrial or light industrial or agricultural. And so if there's an industrial warehouse that has a roof that has the right build out engineering requirements to actually sustain cultivation on the roof, because none of these buildings were ever built with the intention of having another business on the roof. You could fall through. So it's all subject to the building codes and zoning laws of New York City. But I will tell people that if you're interested in cultivation in New York City, it's going to be very difficult because of the real estate costs. And so the outskirts of New York City, Hudson Valley, Central New York, will probably be the hub for cultivation. We're going to try and build out some opportunities for folks to grow in the city, but it's going to be difficult. Amazon has a lot of these warehouses already rented up, and they're like $1 million a year to rent them. So, yeah.
There's a couple of questions here about compliance consulting companies. How is a compliance consulting company different than an attorney in terms of TPI? And is the compliance industry another industry you expect to be ancillary to cannabis businesses?
Yeah, so I think an attorney provides legal advice, formation, contracts. They're not business necessarily specific, but consulting company that's working with a retailer, that's working with a cultivator, they can share information that they're telling one with the other. You know what I mean? Their consulting is very business focused, and so the whole point of this separation of tiers is to increase competition within those tiers. So cultivators are competing with cultivators. Retailers are competing with retailers. They're not competing with giant companies that own both. And so we want to limit the ability of consultants, of service providers, of contractors from coordinating back and forth between those two tiers. There needs to be a very strict separation, just like alcohol. If you guys know how alcohol works in New York, you know, someone who makes and distributes liquor cannot own a liquor store in New York City, because they'll just distribute the products to themselves. They'll double dip, and they'll crowd out all the competition. They'll dominate the market. They'll have a monopoly. And so you have to separate production from retail. Otherwise, it all falls apart.
We're almost towards the end, but I wanted to touch on something that we haven't spoken about yet, and that's legacies.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of conversation about legacy entrepreneurs. How will future licensure include the legacy community?
Yeah, it's such a difficult topic because so you know, example of, and you know, I talk to legacy guys every day. They're incredibly talented entrepreneurs. Some of the best growers in the state who know how to grow top tier cannabis are in the legacy community. They've been growing weed in Brooklyn and New York for decades, and we need them in the legal industry. And so I'll give you an example of how a legacy operator I know and how they're making it work transitioning to legal. So this legacy operator is just an incredible grower, has been growing in the Bronx, South Bronx for the last 10 years, got a green thumb, knows how to grow some of the best weed in the country. But what he didn't know was zoning, construction, you know, tax forms for your contractors, and all the paperwork involved with running a business. So he's partnered with, you know, someone he grew up with from his community who has a construction contracting company. And so them together, that is, you know, a complete, that's a full, they've got the paperwork
package,
guy,
right?
Yeah, they got the grow guy, and they're making
Right.
it work. And, you know, they're, you know, last time I talked to them, they were looking at, you know, 20,000 square foot warehouses in Westchester to try and get a license to grow. And it's because they have both those. They could go to investors and be like, yeah, you know, I'm a legacy grower. I have the culture and I have the expertise to grow, and I may not have the business fundamentals down, but this guy does. And so they see them together and it looks like a complete package. And so those kind of partnerships are forming organically all over the state. And that's how legacy really can enter the market. Now, you know, our task, you know, I'm chief equity officer. My focus is on MWBEs, communities disproportionately impacted, like legally defined groups of New Yorkers. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult for us to define legacy. We would need a legal definition that captures exactly who we're talking about. It's almost impossible to come up with how to define that and how to categorize that. And so we can't, you know, technically, you know, include this group in the work that we're doing for these other social equity groups. But that isn't to say that we can't create a legal industry that they can easily access. So if we lower the barriers to entry, and so it's not too expensive to apply, and we make a lot of licenses available, and we help them, we teach them compliance and teach them how to enter this space legally, and we partner with other organizations to provide that education as well. I know a ton of organizations in Brooklyn and Harlem Business Alliance and Regina Smith over there doing great education with the legacy community, getting them ready for this opportunity. If we can partner with organizations like that and help this group get ready, you know, they may not need special prioritization because they already know how to grow weed. They already know how to sell weed. They already know how to distribute and run these businesses. And so it's really just about bringing them to a place where they can apply and be competitive and successful like everybody else. And so we can get them in the market.
What about women in cannabis? Are there, you know, I don't necessarily know if there's going to be a space to give them priority, but will there be any focus on women?
Absolutely. MWBs, women-owned businesses have priority just as much as you know, minority-owned businesses and MWBs. And I think it's you know, the gender gap in cannabis is just as, if not more significant than race gaps in some cases. Like women do not have not been able to access this market at similar rates to men. In a lot of instances, they're the ones doing they're doing a lot of the marketing and branding and events, and they're doing businesses they traditionally do in other market in the cannabis space, but what we want to see in New York is we want to see women-owned cannabis licensed businesses. Black women have not been able to tell their story in cannabis in the legal industry yet, and we all suffer because of that. We don't know what a legal dispensary looks like owned by Black women because there's maybe like 3 of them in the country. And I'll give an example of one that that really inspires me. I don't know if anyone is familiar with Kika Keith in Los Angeles. If you don't know Kika Keith, look her up, Google her. She runs Gorilla RX, the first Black women-owned dispensary in Los Angeles. She just got that license 2 years ago. That's how long it took to get the first Black women-owned dispensary in Los Angeles. And guess what happens as soon as she opens this store? As soon as she gets access and opens this store in Crenshaw, it's blowing up. Everyone wants to go there. Everyone wants to support her business. She's got branded products selling out every other store, and she's expanding to another location. As soon as we get these, people who don't have access to this industry into the industry, it's who everyone wants to support. It's who everyone wants to see succeed. And they do fantastic work, and they tell really unique stories through their brand, and they sell really amazing products. And so, I don't really see it as like, us giving out charity to MWBEs to get them, priority in the industry. Like, if we get them in the industry will be more successful. If the industry doesn't look like New York City, if it doesn't look like the state of New York, how people aren't going to shop there. You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine Harlem like frequenting a store that is, owned by someone from like Colorado? Like, exactly. It just won't work. Like, we can't build a successful industry without Black women, without Asian women, without social equity operators running these businesses and telling their story. And so, yeah.
Now, is there anything else that you feel like, the public should know, people wanting to get into the cannabis industry as a business leader need to know about, how to be smart about getting engaged, how to get access to OCM? What do you want people to walk away understanding that we haven't already discussed?
I want to do 2 things. So one is something that I recently shared in an interview on this podcast, but it's important for folks to understand. There's been a lot of talk about cannabis licenses and the industry as sort of some sort of ticket to financial freedom, as some sort of lottery. Like, I just got to win a license and boom, I'm a millionaire. These are incredibly difficult businesses to run and operate. It's a really brutal industry. And I really want to get people away from thinking that this is, some $1 million opportunity. It is tough, and it's going to take years, maybe years, before you even see profit, like substantial profit, if at that. There's a lot of challenges in the industry that involve, compliance costs and tax. The tax code 280E. If you don't know what 280E is, read about that. But essentially, cannabis businesses cannot deduct their operating expenses from their taxes. So you will sometimes pay 90% tax rates on your income, on your revenue and profits. And it's terribly difficult business. And so I want people to be very aware of what they're stepping into before they go after it. And the second thing is having a license, winning a license, not even winning a license. I hate saying winning a license. Getting a license that, in a legal industry is not the only way to participate in legal cannabis. There's a lot of focus on getting that licensed business and doing this and doing that. I was a licensed hemp farmer, CBD farmer. I could have been a licensed, I could be licensed in this if I'd stayed in the private industry with my business, but I don't want to do that. I wanted to be in cannabis in this role. I wanted to work on economic development and policy and other things. And I know other people who just want to do marketing and branding in the ancillary space or do events, and they don't want to run a grow or run a dispensary. And so really think specifically about your skill set, what you bring to the space, that, and it doesn't have, if it doesn't translate to a grow or a distribution license or whatever, you can find other ways to participate in this industry: education, marketing, advocacy. There's just a ton of opportunity that's gonna be popping up over the next few years. And I would hate it if people only saw it as an opportunity to get a license and nothing else. There's a lot more to cannabis than just a license.
Thank you for that. We did get one more question in the
Go
chat. Is there any information about needing a license for cannabis in the food industry? Not cupcakes or basic edibles, but infused spices, honey, meals. So in restaurants, like, how is the Food and Drug Administration, like, how are we gonna work with the health department
Yeah.
on food?
There will just be so because it's dosages. So a certain product might only be able to have 20 milligrams in each product, and so you have to have like a standard way of getting that 20 milligram dose into each cookie or each bottle of spices or whatever that you're making. So those will be the regulations. It'll just tell you like what the requirements are as far as ingredients, how much THC you can have per bottle, how does that bottle need to be like childproof. That's how we're gonna regulate that space. But I'll say that food and beverage is an area that a lot of Black and brown entrepreneurs succeed at in New York City, and so we know that, and so we're looking at processor license, making that very easy and very available for folks to just step into that space and infuse products and make their own brands and sell their products in stores. And a lot of these, what are they? These kitchens, these shared kitchen spaces across the city. I can see facilities like that eventually being licensed with a processor license, and allowing entrepreneurs to come in and infuse their own products that they then sell in stores. And so that's going to be a huge opportunity for folks who are like have a culinary background or into beverages or something. So we will definitely be launching that next year as well.
There got another one that just came up. So there's a question here, and I know we just talked about smoke shops, but are they legal? Are they not legal?
No, they're all illegal. They're pretending to be legal. They're frauds, and they'll be shut down eventually. But don't buy cannabis from them because they have no. If you ask them where it's from, they'll have no idea. If you're gonna buy weed still in New York, buy it from your local grower, someone from your community who's been selling cannabis in that community for a while. I mean, I consume cannabis. Legal stores aren't open yet, so I still buy illegal cannabis, but I do not buy it from those shops that are trying to trick people.
City and state. So New York City, you already mentioned. There's going to be a lot of activity happening there. Obviously, the program is stemming from the state legislation, law, and the state agency. How are you coordinating with not only New York City, but also the other municipalities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to Rochester on Monday. I'll be in Sag Harbor the day after that. Then I'm going to Albany next Friday. I mean, I live in New York City. I've been here 10 years. Chris is from here. Tremaine is from here. New York City is obviously a big part of why legal cannabis in New York really matters, because of how many people come here and will learn about cannabis in New York City once it's legal here and once the stores are open. But we are in conversation with all of our stakeholders across the state. There's Buffalo wants a piece of the action, Rochester, Syracuse, and these are also communities with a lot of brown and Black folks who are also have seen the loss of a lot of industry, loss of a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of economic hardship in upstate and central New York, and so we're cognizant of that and how we can have impact up there and ensure that they have access to these licenses as well. But really, I'll say the opportunity upstate is to grow and manufacture the products that are going to be sold in the city. The opportunity in the city is to have the stores, to have delivery, to have on-site consumption, because you're the ones where the consumers live, the ones with all the money to spend on cannabis. I mean, nowhere consumes more cannabis in the world than New York City. And so upstate will benefit with the cultivation industry, with the manufacturing industry in cannabis, and the city will benefit from that retail opportunity.
Thank you. So I know we talked about being able to get in contact with folks. So want to just make sure you all have the contact information for the Office of Cannabis Management. We have the website, which has a wealth of information on there, everything from the law itself to the current regulations. And that's where you'll be able to also sign up to get additional information. I'm on that listserv as well, so I get those emails and alerts whenever there's a board meeting. So I myself would highly recommend you sign up for that. New York City Small Business Services, they are also, offering small businesses support, especially in the space of cannabis. So I would recommend you check out that website. And also you can always reach out to the Black Institute, especially if you have any follow-up questions from tonight's workshop. Our email address is there. You can, send us your questions, send us anything you want to ask us, we'll definitely provide. And I lastly want to just mention that we're going to have our final workshop in the series. This one will be live and in person. Hopefully, Damien will see you there. But we're going to have a bunch of really super stellar panelists. And, we're going to get into, some of the, more in-depth details, talk about predators, talk about, medical, talk about, a little bit more about legacy. We're going to kind of cover it all in this workshop. So please, 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 if you can be there, don't forget to register. You should have received an email. Since you're here today, you should be receiving an email shortly, if not today, tomorrow, with this flyer. So please don't forget to register. We look forward to see you there. Damien, thank you so much for your information, for being present today. I think we got a lot of questions answered, and I know you're very busy and continuing to build this amazing program. Is there anything that you want to close out with, the last thought?
You guys got a lot of information today. Take that information back to your community and share it with people. We got a lot of information we need to catch up on as a community, Black New Yorkers. I really just encourage all of you to share this information with your people, and yeah, I thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you so much. Everyone, please be well. Have a great evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Bye, everybody.